Some disappearances happen in plain sight. No screams, no struggle, no witnesses who saw enough to stop it. Just absence. 26 years ago, in a town where doors were rarely locked and neighbors knew each other by name, someone vanished without a trace. A child. A person with a routine. A life that simply stopped. There were no ransom notes. No confirmed sightings. No body. Only questions. For the family left behind, time did not heal the wound. It stretched it. Every birthday uncelebrated it. Every holiday marked by an empty chair. At first, everyone believed the same thing. They'll turn up. Someone must have seen something. Cases like this don't just disappear. But days became weeks. Weeks became years. And the case grew cold. Police followed every lead they had. They interviewed neighbors, friends, strangers. They searched fields, rivers, back roads. And then, the trail ended. Officially, the case remained open. But quietly, it was filed away. Another unexplained disappearance. Another mystery with no ending. For more than 2 decades, this file sat untouched. No updates, no answers, no justice. Until now, because 26 years later, the FBI reopened the case. Not because of pressure, not because of media attention, but because something didn't sit right. A detail that had been overlooked. A piece of evidence that technology couldn't read back then. A statement that suddenly sounded different. What was once invisible became impossible to ignore. The FBI began retracing every step, every hour, every decision made on the day the person vanished. And what they found would reopen wounds long thought closed, and raise disturbing questions about what really happened all those years ago. Was this a crime of opportunity? A planned disappearance? Or something hidden in plain sight for decades? Tonight, we revisit a true story. An unexplained disappearance. A mystery that refused to stay buried. And a case that waited 26 years for the truth to catch up. Before the headlines, before the search parties, before the case number, there was a life. Their name was Michael Turner. He was 12 years old when he disappeared. Old enough to crave independence. Young enough to still believe the world was mostly safe. Michael was the kind of kid teachers described as quiet, but observant. Not the loudest in the room. Not the troublemaker. He noticed things. He remembered small details. Faces. Routes. Who said what and when. At home, Michael was the middle child. An older sister who teased him relentlessly, and a younger brother who followed him everywhere. To his family, he was the peacemaker. The one who smoothed over arguments. The one who said it's fine even when it wasn't. Their house sat on a quiet street where evenings smelled like cut grass and summer rain. A place where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. Michael had chores, homework, a bedtime he sometimes pushed. He loved comic books, baseball cards, and long walks to the corner store with a few crumpled dollars in his pocket. To his friends, Michael was dependable. The kid who showed up when he said he would. The one who didn't break promises. If Michael said he'd be home by dinner, he was, until the day he wasn't. The day Michael disappeared began like any other. No arguments, no signs of trouble, no warnings. He woke up early, ate breakfast, grabbed his backpack. School that day ended at 3:10 p.m. Witnesses remember seeing him leave the building with a small group of friends, laughing, talking about nothing important. By 3:45 p.m., Michael parted ways with the others. He told one friend he was heading home, told another he might stop by the park first. A normal decision, the kind no one remembers until it's the last one ever made. The route home was familiar. A 10-minute walk, 2 streets, 1 crossing. Michael had walked it hundreds of times. But somewhere between the school gates and his front door, Michael Turner vanished. When dinner came and Michael didn't, his parents weren't immediately afraid. Kids ran late. Phones weren't always answered. But as daylight faded, concern turned to fear. By nightfall, his name was being called into the dark. Neighbors joined the search. Flashlights swept across yards. Voices echoed down streets. No one found him. No one saw him get into a car. No one heard a scream. Just silence. And in that silence, a family's life split in two. Before and after. At the time, no one knew this ordinary day would become the most analyzed day of their lives. And no one could imagine that it would take the FBI 26 years to come back to this moment and ask what everyone else missed. When a case goes cold, answers don't disappear. They change shape. They become theories, whispers, rumors passed quietly, usually after dark. In the years after Michael Turner vanished, the town filled in the silence the investigation left behind. Everyone had an idea of what happened, and almost everyone had someone to blame. The first and most common theory was the simplest, that Michael was taken by someone passing through. A drifter, a delivery driver, a traveler who saw opportunity, and vanished just as quickly. The town sat close to a busy highway, long stretches of road with no cameras, no tolls, no record of who came or went. Witnesses reported an unfamiliar vehicle near the school that afternoon. Descriptions varied. Different colors, different models, different times. Nothing solid enough to chase. And with no license plate, the stranger theory stayed exactly that. The theory. Statistically, investigators knew something uncomfortable. Most children who disappear are taken by someone familiar, someone trusted, someone overlooked. Attention shifted inward. Teachers, neighbors, family friends. One name surfaced more than once. A man who lived 2 blocks from Michael's home. Quiet, private, known for offering rides to kids when it rained. He had an alibi. Not airtight, but enough. No physical evidence ever tied him to Michael's disappearance. Still, years later, his name was whispered whenever the case resurfaced. Another theory suggested something even more unsettling. That Michael wasn't the target. That he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. A drug deal, a theft, an argument that turned violent. The park along Michael's route had a reputation. Nothing officially reported. But locals knew. Teenagers drank there. Adults came and went quickly. No one admitted to being there that afternoon. And no one remembered seeing Michael, even though someone should have. A theory investigators never liked, but couldn't ignore. That Michael left on his own. That something at home or school pushed him to run. But nothing supported it. No packed bag. No missing clothes. No money taken. Michael hadn't talked about leaving. Hadn't acted withdrawn. And at 12 years old, he had nowhere to go. Each theory had one thing in common. They explained part of the story, but never all of it. No blood, no witnesses, no confirmed sightings beyond that afternoon. Just fragments. Over time, suspicion shifted. People moved away. Memories blurred. Details changed. And the town learned to live with uncertainty. But some names never stopped surfacing. And when the FBI reopened the case, those names returned with them, not as rumors, but as leads. Because when federal agents re-examined the evidence, they noticed something local investigators hadn't. Connection, pattern, a decision made in the first 48 hours that changed everything. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Now, it looked like the beginning of the truth. But before the FBI could understand what really happened, they had to understand why the case failed the first time. For 26 years, Michael Turner's disappearance lived in a kind of limbo. Not solved, not forgotten, just unfinished. Local police never officially closed the case. But without evidence, without witnesses, and without answers, there was nowhere left to go. Until time itself became an advantage. Decades later, law enforcement had something they didn't have in the late 1990s: perspective and technology. The case didn't reopen because of pressure from the media or a sudden confession. It reopened because of a single lead, small enough to be ignored, but persistent enough to refuse to disappear. Came in quietly, Not a dramatic phone call. Not a letter filled with guilt. Just a tip from someone who had stayed silent for more than 2 decades. They said they remembered something differently now. Something that didn't make sense back then, but wouldn't let them sleep anymore. When the FBI reviews a cold case, they don't start by asking what happened. They ask a more dangerous question. Agents requested every piece of evidence still in existence. Photos, clothing, witness statements, audio tapes. Some items were damaged, some incomplete, but others had never been fully examined. Back in the 1990s, DNA testing was limited. Today, it isn't. Items once considered useless were now reclassified as potential gold mines. Fabric fibers, touch DNA, microscopic traces no one could isolate before. Evidence was uploaded into national databases that didn't exist when Michael vanished. CODIS, NAMAs, VICAP, systems designed not just to solve crimes, but to connect them. And something unexpected happened. Partial match. Not enough to name a suspect, but enough to raise alarms. Agents rebuilt the day Michael disappeared, minute by minute, using modern tools, traffic patterns, cell tower data from nearby areas, archived weather records, even things once dismissed as irrelevant, like a vehicle sighting with the wrong color, were reconsidered. Because memory fades, but data doesn't. Then came the second break. A former witness, now older, removed from the town and no longer afraid, asked to speak again. Their original statement hadn't been false, just incomplete. Back then, they hadn't understood what they were seeing. Now, they did. They mentioned a detail never recorded in the original report. A pause, a hesitation, a decision that suddenly mattered. That detail aligned with the new forensic findings. Not perfectly, but close enough to reopen every question. That's when the case crossed a line. From local mystery to federal investigation, the FBI officially reopened the disappearance of Michael Turner. Not as a missing persons file, but as a potential crime. Agents began traveling to the town, interviewing people who hadn't been questioned in years. Some were cooperative, others weren't, and a few were visibly shaken by the simple fact that the case was alive again. For the first time in 26 years, the evidence wasn't scattered. It was converging. Patterns emerged, contradictions surfaced, and one early decision, made in the first 48 hours, stood out as a critical failure. A decision that protected the wrong person, or overlooked the right one. And as agents followed that thread, they realized something chilling. Michael Turner hadn't just vanished. Someone had helped make sure he stayed gone. When the FBI takes over a cold case, they don't rush. They slow everything down. Because time is where the truth hides. The task force assigned to Michael Turner's case was small by design. No press briefings. No public timelines. Just analysts, profilers, forensic specialists, and case agents, each tasked with tearing apart the past. Some had worked hundreds of disappearances. Others specialized in cases that failed the first time. Their first conclusion was immediate. This wasn't a lack of evidence case. It was a misinterpreted evidence case. Names once crossed off were placed back on the board. Not as suspects, as questions. Why were they cleared so quickly? Who verified the alibis? What assumptions were made? Several interviews from 1998 stood out. Short, rushed, incomplete. In one case, a witness was never interviewed twice. In another, a follow-up question was written, but never asked. Dozens of photos from the original search were digitized and enhanced. Backgrounds were examined. Reflections in windows. Shadows on pavement. Objects half hidden at the edges of frames. In one image, something had always been dismissed as a trick of the light. A dark shape near a fence line, too blurry to matter, until modern enhancement revealed it wasn't random. It was placed, not enough to identify, but enough to raise a new question. Michael's clothing, preserved for decades, was re-examined. At the time, nothing had been found. No blood, no tears. But forensic science had evolved. Touch DNA, transfer fibers, skin cells invisible to 1990s testing. Results came back slowly. One test inconclusive, another negative. Then, something strange. Partial profile that didn't belong to Michael. Not enough to identify, but enough to confirm contact. Someone else had been there. Analysts reviewed original witness statements not for facts but for patterns. Changes in wording, hesitation, defensive language. One individual statement stood out, not because of what it said, but because of what it avoided. Their story hadn't changed in 26 years. That consistency, oddly enough, made agents uneasy. Truth evolves as memory fades. Lies stay rigid. At one point, the team believed they had it. A timeline lined up. A vehicle matched. A suspect's movements overlapped perfectly. Agents prepared to move forward. Then it fell apart. The vehicle sighting came from the wrong day. The witness had misremembered the weather. Another dead end. Another reminder that cold cases punish assumptions. The breakthrough didn't come from a major piece of evidence. It came from a box no one had prioritized. Inside, receipts, notes, and items considered irrelevant in 1998. One item, barely documented, raised eyebrows. A note referencing a meeting time. No location, no names, just a time. When cross-referenced with the reconstructed timeline, that time shouldn't have mattered. But it did, because it placed someone somewhere they claimed they never were. Agents began calling people back in. No accusations, just questions. Some cooperated immediately. Others asked for lawyers. One person refused to speak at all. That silence said more than any confession could have. By the end of the review phase, the team hit a wall. They had indications, patterns, inconsistencies, but no single piece strong enough to act on. Not yet. Then a forensic analyst noticed something no one else had. Not in the evidence, but in the absence of it. Something that should have been there, wasn't. And once they realized what it was, the entire case shifted direction. In long investigations, breakthroughs rarely arrive with drama. No alarms, no sudden confessions. Just a quiet moment when someone notices what doesn't belong. It happened during a routine cross-check. An analyst was reviewing evidence timelines, not looking for something new, but looking for consistency. One item kept resurfacing, not because it was important in 1998, but because it was ignored. A piece of evidence logged, but never fully examined. Michael's backpack. When Michael disappeared, his backpack was found near a fence line, less than a mile from his home. At the time, police believed it had been dropped during a struggle, or discarded by someone panicking. No fingerprints were recovered. No blood, so it was shelved. But modern forensic review changed that assumption. Using techniques unavailable 26 years ago, analysts reprocessed the fabric. Not looking for fingerprints, looking for transfer, touch DNA, trace fibers, skin cells embedded deep in the seams. The results didn't come immediately. Days passed, then weeks. Then the lab flagged something unusual. Partial DNA profile. Not Michael's. It wasn't a full match. Not enough to trigger an arrest, but enough to be compared. The profile was uploaded into national databases. Nothing came back. First. And that's when the case nearly stalled again. The real break came from somewhere else. A follow-up interview. One the FBI almost canceled. A former neighbor, now living in another state, had agreed to speak one more time. They had always claimed they saw nothing unusual that day. But as agents walked through the timeline again, their story began to drift. Small pauses, hesitation, a correction that wasn't asked for. Then the witness said something new, something they had never said before. They mentioned seeing Michael, talking to someone, not struggling, not afraid, talking. They hadn't mentioned it before because, at the time, they didn't think it mattered. It was someone familiar. someone who belonged, someone no one thought to question deeply. When agents overlaid the new statement with the forensic findings, the timelines aligned, the location matched, and the DNA profile, partial as it was, suddenly made sense. It didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone local, someone who had been interviewed, someone who had been cleared. That's when the room went quiet. Not because they had proof, but because they finally had direction. For 26 years, this person had lived freely, never charged, never named publicly, protected by early assumptions and the absence of technology. Until now, the FBI didn't move immediately. They didn't confront. They watched. They reviewed everything again, this time through a single lens. And what they found suggested something chilling. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was controlled, planned, and carefully hidden. Michael hadn't vanished. He had been removed. At the 95th minute of this investigation, the question was no longer what happened. It was whether the truth would finally be spoken or forced into the light, because the FBI now knew who to look at. And next, they would ask them to explain the one thing they never could. After decades of silence, after years of dead ends, the investigation finally reached its turning point. The person the FBI had been watching, the one whose DNA matched the partial evidence, was located, arrested quietly. No media circus, no public spectacle. It was just a man finally confronted with the truth he had avoided for more than 26 years. The suspect didn't deny involvement. Not at first. As questions were asked, the story unfolded. Details that had remained hidden in shadows now came to light. How Michael had been taken, how he had been moved, how early investigative assumptions had delayed justice, and slowly, painfully, why he had vanished. The family, after 26 years of unanswered questions, finally had closure. Shock, relief, sorrow, grief and gratitude intertwined. For decades, birthdays had gone uncelebrated. Holidays had passed in silence. Every milestone had been shadowed by absence. Now, answers brought a measure of peace. Even the investigators, those who had followed the case across decades, felt it. The weight of unfinished work lifted, if only slightly, because justice, though delayed, had arrived. But closure does not erase the past, cannot give back lost years, cannot undo fear, cannot fill empty chairs. Cases like Michael Turner's remind us of the fragility of life and the persistence of truth. How a single detail, overlooked in haste, can hold a lifetime of consequences. How time does not heal all wounds. Sometimes it waits, waiting for someone patient enough to follow the thread to the end. The FBI's reopening of the case proved one thing. No matter how long a mystery remains unsolved, justice can eventually find its way. And sometimes the answers lie not in new crimes, but in the careful re-examination of old ones. For families like the Turners, the past can never be rewritten, but the truth can finally be known. The reopening of Michael Turner's case did more than solve a mystery. It changed a community. Neighbors who once whispered theories in fear now spoke openly about vigilance and care. Local law enforcement reviewed old protocols. They trained differently. They archived evidence more carefully. They asked questions they might have skipped before. Even the FBI took note. Cold cases that had been shelved decades ago began to be reevaluated. Modern forensics, new witness interviews, and persistent investigators all combined to show that time need not be the enemy of justice. For the Turners, closure could not bring back lost years. It could not replace birthdays, holidays, or the everyday moments stolen by absence. But it gave them something just as valuable: certainty, understanding, and the knowledge that their son's story was finally heard. Cases like this remind us, even after decades, justice can prevail. Even in the quiet corners, overlooked by time, the truth waits, and sometimes it is patience, persistence, and the courage to look again that finally brings it into the light. In memory of Michael Turner, and all those who vanished without a trace.